You will lose someone you love. You already know this. You just don't let yourself think about it most days. But somewhere in your mind, a quiet calculation is always running, and it has been running since long before you were born. What you do when someone dies didn't start with funeral homes or flowers or black suits. It started in caves, on riverbanks, in the dirt outside a fire that had not yet learned to stay lit through winter. And the strange part is this: the way you grieve today is not really yours. It's borrowed from people who never wrote anything down, who left no names behind, and who somehow figured out something you still rely on every single time you lose someone. Start with a question that sounds simple. When did humans first bury their dead? Not eat them, not abandon them, not leave them where they fell. Bury them, on purpose, with intention. The answer is older than you'd guess. At a site called Kifse, in what is now northern Israel, archaeologists found human remains dating back roughly 100,000 years. One skeleton was a child, curled into a position that looked deliberate, with deer antlers placed near the body. Deer antlers don't end up next to a child by accident. Someone put them there, someone chose them. That single detail changes everything. It means that before agriculture, before cities, before language as complex as yours, someone stood over a small body and made a decision. Not "let's leave this here," but "this needs something, this needs care." You might think burial was about hygiene. Keep disease away, keep predators away, keep the camp clean. And there's some truth in that. But hygiene doesn't explain antlers. Hygiene doesn't explain flowers. At a site called Shanidar Cave in Iraq, researchers including Ralph Solecki in the 1960s, and later a team led by Chris Hunt and Eleni Asudi revisiting the same site decades later, found pollen clusters around a Neanderthal skeleton. The pollen suggested flowering plants, possibly placed intentionally around the body. The original interpretation became famous and was nicknamed the flower burial. Later researchers debated whether the pollen came from burrowing animals or wind rather than human hands. Scientific debates like that one almost never resolve cleanly. But here's what's strange. Even the skeptics don't argue that the burial itself was accidental. They argue about the flowers, not the grave. Something was already happening tens of thousands of years before recorded history. Hominins, not just modern humans, were treating death as a moment that required action. Why would that matter to evolution? A body in the ground doesn't run faster. It doesn't hunt better. It doesn't pass on genes. From a purely selfish survival of the fittest lens, burying the dead looks like wasted energy. Unless grief itself is the adaptation. Think about what loss actually triggers in you. Not abstractly, physically. Your chest tightens, your appetite disappears. You replay memories uninvited. Anthropologist and psychiatrist John Bowlby spent decades studying attachment, originally in children, and his core insight extends further than he first realized. Bowlby proposed that attachment bonds exist because they kept early humans alive. A child who stayed close to a caregiver survived. A caregiver who felt distress when a child wandered off intervened in time. Grief, in this view, is not a malfunction. It's the cost of having had a functioning attachment system in the first place. You don't grieve because something broke. You grieve because something worked. The bond was real. The system that screams "go check on them" when they're missing is the same system that screams when they're never coming back. So early humans who buried their dead with care may not have been performing religion as you understand it. They may have been managing an unbearable signal. A loved one's body, left in plain sight, kept triggering the find them, help them, protect them instinct long after it was useless. Burial ended the signal. It gave the brain a stopping point. Is that the whole story, though? Probably not. By around 30,000 years ago, burials become more elaborate. At the Sungir site in Russia, archaeologists uncovered 2 children buried head to head, covered in thousands of ivory beads, with spears made from straightened mammoth tusks laid beside them. Thousands of beads. That represents an enormous number of hours, likely contributed by many people, not one grieving parent working alone. This is where things shift from instinct to something closer to culture. A society had to agree, collectively, that these specific deaths deserved enormous communal investment. That's not just attachment anymore. That's meaning-making on a group scale. Anthropologist Ernest Becker argued in his work The Denial of Death that human civilization itself, every religion, every monument, every story about an afterlife, functions partly as a buffer against the terror of knowing you will die. Becker wasn't writing about Paleolithic burial sites specifically, but his framework fits unsettlingly well. If you know you will die, and you know everyone you love will die, you need something to do with that knowledge, or it paralyzes you. Burial rituals may be one of the oldest technologies humans ever invented. Not stone tools, not fire, a technology for managing the unbearable awareness of mortality. Here's the part that should make you sit up a little. Funerals, candles, photos at memorials, even posting a tribute online when a public figure dies. These aren't separate inventions. They are the same instinct, restyled for the century you happen to live in. When you visit a grave and talk to a headstone, you are doing what someone in Shanidar Cave may have done, kneeling beside a body, surrounded by flowers, saying something into silence. The components changed, the need didn't. Consider something modern psychology calls continuing bonds, a concept formalized by researchers Dennis Klass, Phyllis Silverman, and Stephen Nickman in the 1990s. For most of the 20th century, Western psychology assumed healthy grief meant letting go. Detach, move on, sever the connection. Klass and his colleagues found something different in how real people actually grieved. The healthiest mourners often weren't the ones who let go fastest. They were the ones who found new ways to keep the relationship alive, talking to the deceased, keeping objects, imagining what the person would say in a difficult moment. That's not dysfunction. That's an ancient strategy resurfacing, the same one that placed antlers next to a child 100,000 years ago. You don't erase the bond. You translate it into a form that doesn't require the person to be physically present anymore. Now think about something you might never have connected to any of this. Why do certain places still feel different to you? A cemetery, a childhood home after a parent has passed, a specific song. Why does your body react before your conscious mind catches up? This is the same neural machinery. The amygdala and hippocampus, structures involved in emotional memory, don't distinguish neatly between this is over and this still matters. Grief researcher George Bonanno, who has spent over 20 years studying how people cope with loss, found that there's no single correct timeline for grief. Some people show what looks like resilience almost immediately, others take years. Bonanno's research pushed back against the idea of fixed grief stages that you might have heard simplified into 5 steps. Real grief is messier. It moves in waves, not stairs. That messiness might look like malfunction if you compare it to a tidy 5-step chart. But it looks a lot more like an ancient, deeply functional system if you compare it to a 100,000-year-old grave with deer antlers placed beside a child. So what did ancient humans actually do when someone died? They didn't have hospitals. They didn't have insurance forms or scheduled services or rehearsed eulogies. What they had was simpler and somehow more honest. They stopped. They marked the body with something that mattered: flowers, antlers, beads, tools. They let the community see the loss, not just the individual. And then, slowly, they found a way to keep living beside the absence, rather than pretending it wasn't there. You do the same thing, even now, even without realizing it. You keep a voicemail you'll never delete. You set a place at the table out of habit, before catching yourself. You talk out loud to someone who can't answer, just to hear yourself say it. None of that is irrational. It's one of the oldest behaviors your species has ever practiced, running quietly underneath a life that otherwise looks nothing like a cave. The flowers changed. The antlers became headstones, became photographs, became playlists you can't listen to anymore. But the instinct underneath has barely moved at all. You will lose someone you love, and without ever being taught how, some part of you already knows exactly what to do.